It is an open secret that Russia needs money and has gas to sell. Meanwhile, it is no secret at all that China has money and needs gas. It would seem like a match made in heaven, but they just cannot seem to get a deal done. And that is a much bigger problem than the headlines would seem to suggest. The brouhaha began over plans for the Power of Siberia 2, a pipeline that would run from gas fields in western Siberia through Mongolia and then to customers in China, and would complement the existing Power of Siberia pipeline that serves the east. Economically, and therefore implicitly militarily speaking, Russia needs some kind of win here. While the Kremlin concluded May 2024 by hosting an award celebration for noted luminaries, its budget deficit for the year projects to be 1.1% of gross domestic product, a combination of mounting costs for the war in Ukraine and struggles within its traditional powerhouse energy sector. The latter is an accumulation of a bunch of problems that would each be significant in isolation, but combine to be so much worse. The sabotage of the Nord Stream pipeline to Germany way back in September 2022, the G7 imposed price cap on Russian oil later that year, and the seemingly endless Ukrainian attacks on Russian refineries and other infrastructure that has hardly slowed despite Moscow having plenty of time at this point to develop countermeasures. And yes, that was a run-on sentence because the number of these attacks keeps stretching these segments longer and longer. And I guess now is a good time to ask, how are you doing? Let me know in the comments. I care. No, wait, I guess there was one more. Now we're done. Anyway, the once mighty Russian energy industry is now resorting to importing gasoline from Belarus and seeking help from Kazakhstan to compensate. Meanwhile, the crown jewel of the industry, Gazprom, posted a not-so-nice $6.9 billion loss in 2023. All in all, it is a bad time for the Kremlin. But Moscow's policymakers have long seen China as the solution to its problem here, thanks to the limitless partnership that the two countries share. With that as the backdrop, Russian President Vladimir Putin traveled to Beijing on May 16th in hopes of establishing an economic lifeline. Now, this was a reasonable expectation. China has acted in this capacity throughout the war thus far. All of that excess gas and oil from Europe had to go somewhere, and China was the sensible alternative. But as we discussed way earlier in the war, despite the limitless partnership, Beijing was not doing this out of the goodness of its own heart. At best, China has been ambivalent about the invasion, and, at worst, it has been annoyed at Russia's strategic blunders. After all, their partnership is supposed to collectively counterbalance Western influence worldwide. Thus, there have not been any simple handouts to Russia here. In turn, when China became the obvious place for excess Russian fuel exports, the transactions were not at market price. Russia had to give a discount to Chinese importers. Still, Putin had more lofty goals on his most recent trip. Ordinarily, natural gas is expensive to transport, but pipelines are the exception. They are cost-efficient on a per-unit basis. The catch, though, is that pipelines are still capital-intensive projects. Consequently, you need to expect that there will be a sizable lifetime revenue coming through to offset those startup costs. Obtaining a guarantee on that front was Putin's main mission for his visit to China. But once he arrived, Putin apparently discovered that the limitless partnership had limits. You see, China decided to play hardball here. Russia was already supplying gas at a lower price than China's other importers, $4.40 per million BTU, compared to $5 from Uzbekistan and $10 from Myanmar. But in the recent negotiations, China moved to seeking the subsidized price that Russian consumers pay. This was asking for a lot indeed. Subsidized energy prices are a part of the Kremlin's political efforts to keep the public's support, and thus are very expensive. As a result, the Kremlin balked at China's demand, resulting in a failure to reach an agreement on the most important point of the trip, even as Beijing did agree to more minor things, like not attending Ukraine's peace summit and some help in the banking sector, despite the risk of Western sanctions. However, the standard media take on this outcome has been poor. It has been something to the effect of course this ended in failure. Russia is in a weak position, and China wants to exploit it. The problem with that line of thinking, though, is that all of these factors were publicly known already. That is, China already knew about Russia's weak position, and Russia already knew that China would seek to take advantage of that. To use a term of art among economists, those factors should have already been priced into the negotiations. For example, suppose that you were willing to pay up to $10 for some good, and I could find an alternative buyer who was willing to pay $4. We may then split the difference at, say, $7, and all live happily ever after. But if the world changed overnight, and suddenly the best alternative price I could get dropped to $2, that should not blow up the entire relationship. For example, it would not make sense for you to begin demanding a price of $1. That just will not work given my position, and you are losing out on a lot by failing to reach an agreement. Rather, we should still be reaching some type of deal, albeit more favorable to you than before. This is the standard tragedy of bargaining. Those more desperate to get a deal done end up getting a worse deal for themselves. Though whether this is indeed a tragedy in this case depends on your perspective regarding the war. In any case, this is basically what we are seeing between China and Russia right now, with a division on this issue forming. Look, this little guy's hunger should match the extra hunger to reach an agreement to build the Power of Siberia 2 between the parties, and yet it appears to be causing problems with the relationship. And this is why the lack of a deal is worse than it seems. It indicates that there is some underlying bargaining friction, namely overconfidence from one of the parties, that is causing a deeper rift in the bargaining environment. Now, what that is will remain a mystery to us. After all, if it were obvious to us as keyboard warriors what the problem was, then it would be obvious to those on the ground as well, and we would be back to getting an agreement to form without major issue. Hopefully between humans and not a robot, though. Anyway, to speculate on what might be happening here, option 1 is that Russia is overconfident in its ability to weather the storm. It would not be the first time that such an incident had happened, even if Russia has since recovered from those earlier mistakes. A more meta possibility is that China believes that Russia believes that weathering the storm will be difficult, but is putting on a public face that indicates otherwise. Thus, China is calling the Kremlin's bluff right now. But the Kremlin is in fact correct in its assessment and its strength, and that is what's causing the delay in the agreement. In this framework, China is the one making the mistake, not Russia. Another possibility is that the Kremlin is banking on China being in a worse position than it seems. This is plausible because the seeds of an economic crisis for Beijing are present. Think about the ramifications of zero-COVID policy, the failure of former real estate giant Evergrande, a population that is declining for the first time in a half a century, and a fertility rate of just 1.09. 1.09! I had to do a bit of a double take there, but it is from their own state media. Whew. That was not a factorial, and it is not an editorial for me to say that these problems could make China more desperate to reach a deal now than later. Under this theory, Moscow went home empty-handed to punish China for bluffing. But regardless of whatever is the underlying cause, it is a mess of a poor informational environment. And that only gets resolved when the deal is delayed long enough to separate whoever is actually weaker than expected from whoever is actually stronger than expected. And that could take 5 days or 5 months. Or maybe Russia will just get frustrated and make the glorious pipeline in Kazakhstan. Or maybe that is just part of the bluff. Again, no one really knows, because if everyone already knew, the informational problem would have already resolved itself. It's just not common knowledge. What is common knowledge is how excellent of a resource these books are for learning more about the war. Check the video description for more information on them. And if you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Take care.